Hi, I'm Todd Pattison, the conservator at the New England Historic Genealogical Society. And I want to talk to you about how to properly unframe an art object or a photograph or a two-dimensional object safely in your own home. Now, some of the reasons that you'd want to unframe an object, first and foremost, if it looks like it's being damaged inside the frame. So this could be something where the mat is burning it from an acidic mat. It could be too much light exposure. This is an example of an object that's starting to yellow because it just has too much light. It's been in that frame for more than 100 years and it's starting to dull all the bright colors. It could be a photograph that might be stuck to the glass. You need to be very careful about that. It could be one that's been water damaged, as in this frame. Or the most likely thing, you might have an object in your collection that's actually slipped in the frame because the mounting system has pulled away. Now, you do want to be careful. Anything that's truly fragile, if it's papyrus, if it's vellum, or if it really is stuck to the glass, as a photograph might be, then you would want to have a real conservator work on that. It's not something that you would want to do in your own home. So here I have the item that I want to unframe. This is the one that's slipped down in the frame, and you can see where it's now below the mat. It was attached with pressure sensitive tape, which has now failed. And I have the tools that I'm going to use to do this and what you would want to have at your home. A pair of pliers, maybe some screwdrivers, a flathead and a Phillips head in case you encounter any screws, some kind of a dull knife, or something that you might use to pry up nails if there's some nails, and a brush so that you can brush this off before you start to take it apart so you're not going to get any dirt on your artwork. And then the last thing that I have is some blue painter's tape. And the reason that I would want to use that would be to hold any broken glass together or to put it onto an intact piece of glass just to make sure that I'm not going to get any damage to my artwork in case the glass breaks while I'm taking it apart. So I'm just going to put a few pieces across here, which would just help to hold this all together when I go to take it apart. And I'm using blue painter's tape for this because it's going to be very easy to remove, unlike another tape which might stick to it a little too much. So I just want that on there fairly spread out over it in case it does shatter, break somewhat, but not. Now the other thing, I have something soft underneath it. Here I have some cardboard. You could also use part of a piece of rug, a rug underlayment, or you could use bubble wrap. So I want to carefully brush this off. This is not very dirty. If it was dirty, I would want to have another piece of paper underneath it so I could collect that dust, but it's very clean. And the other thing that I want to do is to inspect this dust protecting paper on the back to make sure that there's no label or other information that I'd want to save. Even if there's not, you might want to take a photograph of this just so you know what it looked like before you unframed it. If it does have some information, you definitely want to photograph that, and you might want to try to save it. Now the first thing that I'm going to do is to cut this old wire away. Even if you end up putting this back into a frame again, you don't really want to use the old wire because it could be compromised. So I'm just going to cut that off. And then I can work on removing this paper. Now this paper generally is in fairly poor condition, and so I can just remove it with my hands like this, kind of tearing it away, exposing the fasteners that are holding this together. And the reason that I'm doing it with my hand as opposed to cutting it with a knife is I wouldn't want to cut into anything that's on the back. And here you can see the backing of this is just a corrugated cardboard, which is quite acidic, which you also wouldn't want against your piece of artwork. So now I'm going to go and remove all of the nails that are around this, and sometimes they can stick in here quite hard, so you might have to kind of pry them a little bit to get them out. And so I'm just going to go around and do all of these. It's not something that you need to watch on the video. If I had any issues with getting to the nails, I could use this kind of dull knife, a palette knife, something like that, pry them up just a little bit so that I can get a better grip on them with my pliers. So I'm just going to finish the rest of these, and then we'll come back to this. All right, so now I'm just removing the last nail on the back of this frame, and now it should be loose, and I can just check it to make sure that it's loose by popping it up. But I don't want to try to remove it this way. I want to look at the artwork when I'm removing it and carefully remove the layers. So I'm going to take this board, and I'm going to use the board to hold this all together, and then move it over, and then slowly lift the frame away. And now I can look at the glazing and see what happens when I move that glazing up. So is the artwork attached to it in some way? Did it fuse to it over time? Was it taped to it? And so I can just simply turn that like I'm turning a book, being very careful handling this glass because of the sharp edges. And now I can look at the next layer, which would be this matte layer. And you can see that the piece underneath it wanted to start to hold against it, but it didn't completely. It was originally taped to it, and you can see the pressure sensitive tape staining that you have on that. And so that has all just moved away. And now we can see the piece was sometime probably in the 50s or the 60s, just mounted against this awful piece of cardboard. And so the next thing that I want to do is to have some kind of a folder ready to put this piece in so that I'm protecting it still, because once it comes out of the frame, it's no longer going to be protected. And so I can simply move the piece over. Now it's in the folder, it's protected, and I can then clean up my workspace and try to look at that a little more closely. So I wanted to show you two other types of ways that an object might be put into a frame. That one was with brads in the back. And I have this image of it's a great image of a dog driving a car in the 1930s, which might be something that you might want to try to have digitized and to share with other family members or other people. And it's also directly against the glass. There's no separation, and I would be worried if this got some moisture that it could actually stick to the glass, the gelatin layer. So this on the back is actually held in with staples as opposed to being brads underneath it. So this is the primary support. So to remove staples like this, you might use your screwdriver, your flathead screwdriver, and dig underneath the staple, being very careful when you get underneath, and just slowly work on prying those staples up, because you have to remove the staples in order to remove this cardboard backing. And there's another system where objects are held into the frame, and that would be kind of a do-it-yourself frame system where you have clips on the edges, and if you turn these clips back, so it's very easy to take something like this out and put it back in. It's also meant to be able to stand on a thing. Then the clips will simply release. You can carefully turn it over, and then again lift the frame off, and then hopefully your photograph would be able to come away from your backing there. So those are two other types that you may encounter. Now, if you run into something that isn't as straightforward as that, if you can't tell how it's put in the frame, then that's where you should turn to a professional and have them try to unframe the object for you. So once you have your object out of the frame, you really want to think about digitizing this. Digitizing it so that you can have another record of it, so you can share it with other people, or so that you can frame a high-quality digital print instead of putting something like this, a hand-colored photograph, on display where it will eventually fade over time. So remember, you want to be very careful when you take things apart from the frame. You want to try to document any writing, any annotations on the back of your frame before you start to take things apart. You want to clean that off. You want to carefully remove any nails, making sure that you're protecting the glass as much as you can, maybe with some blue painter's tape. And you want to be aware of things like papyrus, vellum, very fragile objects or objects that are stuck to the glass, and probably leave that to a professional. So I hope this has given you some more information about how to unframe things carefully at your own home, and thank you for watching this.